Hello, whoever you may be out there. Hope you're having a good evening or whenever you're watching this. Um, Tonight is the full buck moon. So I thought tonight would be like an appropriate night for me to do this video. Um, I'm going to kind of go into something new, like a new avenue of research and exploration. This is something that's kind of been building up for a while. I've been doing a lot of research and traveling to some different places and locations and looking at a lot of different things. Um, but I really want to start this off with the story. So I'm from Kansas City in the Midwest, and I've lived out in Virginia at various times. So I've probably lived in Virginia more of my life now than I have in Kansas City, but I've lived for a short period of time in Cincinnati, Ohio, and also in Chicago. So, I have like this sort of T section, right? From Kansas City to DC, with Cincinnati in the middle, and then Chicago for a brief period of time. And so these places have, personal significance to me. And my wife, of course, is also from Dayton, Ohio, which is maybe like 45 minutes to an hour from Cincinnati. And so we go back there quite a bit. And, I still have good friends of mine that are from there, that a friend of mine that I lived with for some time in Virginia when we were in the military, and then again in Cincinnati. So, I have friends in that area as well. And so I have like a personal connection to Ohio and like that Ohio River Valley there. Um, and so, I've been finding myself recently, probably within the last year and a half, traveling to a lot of these places and, looking at them with a different mindset. And then probably end of last year, I started to follow the work of Michael Wan on his channel, Susquehanna Alchemy, and Roz Ben, and he's up in Philadelphia. And I was just fascinated by the work that they were doing. And I had been going to all of these places and looking at all of these sites. And I wasn't really like doing any research, but I had all of this information and these experiences in my mind. And so I really started like last year, kind of getting into looking at all of the things that they were looking into. In fact, we only live about 2 hours south of the Susquehanna River at the 40th parallel, which is where most of his research had been focused. And so we went up there and we're visiting these places and started having some, really strange experiences. And it set me on this, whole new path. And then just recently, I know that Michael and Ross Ben had done this show together, and they're still doing, called From the 40th Parallel. And, they were talking about how people can just do what they're doing in their own backyard and just apply the template that they've set up. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm starting to look at my own area where I live in the DC area, right on the Potomac River. And, there are definitely some significant things that we've been discovering here, at least over this last year. And I was thinking to myself, well, I want to look into my area, but, what really makes this place significant? And, from a synchromistic point of view, there's so much stuff in DC. It's been done and done and done again, right? Like the layout of the city and the monuments and what they represent and all of this stuff. So I don't want to go down that road. While, I think it's fascinating and definitely significant as part of this area, that's not really my main focus, is to, talk about that in depth. But one of the things that we found here, and I've made some videos about my time up in Pennsylvania and the things that I've experienced and the synchronicities that happened like the very first time we went there. Very powerful synchronicities began happening and are still happening. And so as I began to look at my area, I was having synchronicities associated with things that are personal to me here. and had gone to visit a star fort called Fort Washington. And I had talked a bit too in another video about my my mystical experience that I had there, and just the area itself and the energy surrounding that place. And so I felt like, yeah, this is a significant place geographically. There's something going on here. And, looking into the history of that star fort, and, just discovering that the story of how it was built is, it's ridiculous. It falls apart under scrutiny. And, making me think that the structure or whatever had been there prior to the arrival of the Europeans, was something quite marvelous, and was used for something like healing, as the only sort of sense that I got from the place. But then, of course, it was quickly taken over, probably buried under, demolished, built on top of, and supposedly turned into a military base. And this seems to be, the theme, right? The story is that all of these star forts were built in the 1800s for, after the War of 1812, to protect America from further attacks from the British. But when you look at these star forts, it's the story of how they're built. They don't make any sense. So you look at the structures themselves, and they look very old. And so I'm looking at this Fort Washington star fort, and I'm thinking, where is this on the river? I mean, it's right on the Potomac River. So I'm looking around on the map, and I noticed that the 77th meridian runs right through the middle of it. And, the number 77 just jumped out at me. Like, this is a significant number, for many, many different reasons. I mean, the number 7 itself is really mystical and quite fascinating. But, so I think, okay, 77th meridian. And it just so happens that also runs right through the heart of DC, right by the Capitol building, which is another structure that's questionable on whether or not it was built at the time and in the way they said it was. And so I thought, I really want to get to know this area, like what was going on here, or what has been said about what was going on here, prior to or just at the time of the arrival of the Europeans. And, so drawing off of Michael Wan's work, looking at the John Smith map came to my mind. Okay, well, let me go look at that, because I know that the Potomac River is on his map, and there's a lot of, things in this map that might help me to, research this area, especially the journal that Smith kept, and there's excerpts from which I've looked at some of, and tried to pull some things out of there. And so I decided to start looking at this map and just see what I could find. And so I'm looking at this here, and it just starts unfolding very quickly, and all of these connections start to crop up. And I start noticing that along the 77th meridian are all of these significant places outside of DC as well. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go look at this John Smith map, right, and see what he has on the 77th meridian. And so, this is the map that I'm working with here. And so one of the things that I noticed was that when you look at the lines of longitude on this map, they're not what you would expect them to be. They're not what you're going to get if you look at a digital map today, like Google Maps or Google Earth. These lines are much different. So he starts at longitude 307, and he goes all the way to longitude 311 on the right side. But then something jumped out at me. On the left side, 311 is missing. So it's been purposely left off the map. And, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about, what does that mean? What could the significance of 311 be? If you look at a regular map today, right, and you figure out where exactly the 77th meridian is, it's about right here, right where the Susquehannock Indian is, where the feet are at, where the little description of the people. You follow that, it runs through here, right? This would be like your Washington, D.C. area right in here. And then it goes all the way down and it passes very, very close, like within a mile or so of Jamestown. And Jamestown, featuring prominently in Michael Wan's work, and this map as well, the backwards 40 leading him to the 40th parallel and looking at the Susquehanna River and the Susquehannocks. So I noticed this missing 311, and as I'm thinking about this and wondering, what could this possibly be about? I look at Jamestown on the map, and so on this map there are marked, you can see right here in the bottom, what look like these little arched longhouses that he's drawn to indicate like an Indian settlement or a village. And also some places here with these little like circles with a dot, right? Nowhere else on the map though, other than Jamestown, does Smith put what would look like modern or contemporary to Smith at least, cityscape buildings. But if you look right in here, you can see like a little doorway, a tower with windows up here, another tower here, and a tower here. I mean, it looks like there's a castle here, right? Or you got like the skyline of a built out city. And that doesn't occur anywhere else on the map that I've been able to find. And, we've been talking recently on Thursday nights about, a lot of these impossible architecture or mud flood type buildings, and, positing, who built them and when did they build them? How old are these things really? Like, what did this landscape of America look like back before the settlers came here? When the people that had been here for who knows how long, thousands of years, what was their day-to-day life like? What did their landscape look like? And this idea that we've been given is that it was just this pristine, untouched nature, and they were wild savages that ran around in animal skins and lived in teepees made of animal skins. So a very, very basic life in harmony with nature. But all of this evidence suggests that it wasn't quite like that. Now, we don't really know, did the people that the settlers encountered, were they living in these buildings? Do they know what these buildings were built for, what their purpose was? Did they, are they direct descendants of the people that built them, or did they themselves build them generations before? We don't really have any evidence to go on for that. But the fact that, he took the time and very, very detailed, like you really have to zoom in on this map. So I don't know how big this map was, if like the original copy of it. But, this detailed work is very noticeable when you zoom in, and it looks like this built out town there. And so if you go to that on like Google Earth and you look where it has like, historic Jamestown, you can see what look like the footprints of stone buildings, just, like the outline of, or the shape of buildings. And then they've like built stuff over them. But who knows, how much of that has been buried under and destroyed. I mean, we get this vision of Jamestown being this empty space, and the settlers just stopped there. For some reason, they thought Jamestown would be a great place to just start a colony. And, not out by the Chesapeake. No, they wanted to go up the James River, right? Up here for whatever reason, this was the spot right here. This is where they decided. And, you get this image in your mind that they were living in these wooden homes and very pilgrims in New England kind of feel. And this is what history tells us life was like in the New World for the settlers. But here, I think we have, an indication that maybe it was not that way. Maybe there was, buildings that rivaled anything that they had seen in Europe. And, how many of these things were still standing? How long had they been there? Was there a reset? And if so, did that sort of wipe out a lot of these buildings? And yet some of them were remaining. And the people that sort of inherited these things set about to restore them and clean them up and use them. And we don't really know that, but in my mind, I'm thinking, somewhere along these lines that there was a king or a chief, Powhatan, who controlled this entire area. So Jamestown is just down the James River from Richmond, which was, Powhatan's center of operations. And, this James River was actually called the Powhatan Flu on this map. So it didn't get really called the James River until later. So this Powhatan, who, also features prominently on this map right up here, right? The other prominent thing in this map is Smith's meeting with this king. And this is supposedly the father of Pocahontas, right? And, I'm not going to rehash the story of Pocahontas, but, all of that being said, this is occurring around this area here, Richmond and Jamestown. So you see that Jamestown is on the 77th meridian. So I'm still looking at this map going, okay, but what's the significance of these numbers? And I just start playing with them, right? And I'm like, so it's from 307 to 311. All right, so you got your 7 and your 11, and 7 times 11 is 77. Okay, I mean, I know that's stretching, whatever, but it still seems significant to me. And I'm not saying that's what's being encoded here. I'm saying that just playing around with the numbers that way, I was able to, to see that there is a 77 that was possibly significant to the map maker. And I know that Michael Wan has also posited that the map maker was actually John Dee. I mean, we know that Dee was, skilled in cartography and geography and all of the, he was a polymath. So, Michael thinks that, this map largely, whether it was done by Smith and then, Dee put in things like this and this, whatever, we don't really know for sure, but the suspicion is that, Dee put things in this map and encoded them, right? And left them as clues. And so kind of treating it from that perspective. And so we see that, you have the 40 here, but I'm looking and I'm saying, well, the 77th meridian also seems to be significant. I wonder if it was significant to John Dee or, the people that came here. I wonder if Jamestown wasn't already known about or, had been discovered and they knew that there was a built out city here and that's why they specifically targeted this location to come to, and you notice that Roanoke, the lost colony of Roanoke also lies on the 77th meridian. In fact, the 77th meridian runs through Croatoan Park or forest. And there are some interesting lakes there, which I didn't get any images of for this presentation. But, if you just look on like Google Maps and you follow that 77th meridian down, it passes right through these lakes in this Croatoan Park. And, of course, that's what was carved, or Croatoa, that was carved on the tree in the Roanoke colony. So, there definitely seems to be some significance here. This seems significant to me. So, I'm thinking, well, where do I go from here? Right. So after, looking into all of the 40th parallel stuff and finding all of that interesting as well, because 40th parallel also runs through Columbus, Ohio, which is very close to, where my wife is from. And we travel through there all the time. And we've been doing that for like the last year and a half, going through Columbus and looking at places in and around Columbus and throughout Ohio. So I thought I just, here from Jamestown on the map, right, all the way up to where the 77th meridian intersects the 40th parallel. And so, I'm looking at that area, and I don't know, I don't have it in here, but if you look here, right, it's 25 miles from the High Point Scenic Vista, which is the 40th parallel at the Susquehanna River. It's 25 miles to the west is where the 77th meridian intersects the 40th parallel. So, very, very close. 25 miles, it's, I think if you were to drive this, it'd take you maybe 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes to get to the Susquehanna at the 40th parallel. So not very far at all. And then I'm showing it running down from Jamestown, running through DC and all of these places here that are clustered. I've starred on the map. These are places that I'll be probably going into more detail in further videos to show the significance. So I just thought to connect these two things, you've got the east-west line, this 40th parallel, and its connection to the Joseph Smith 1612 map, and the connection to John Dee and the Rosicrucians and Ephrata Cloister. And so I thought, well, this line here that's running through where I live is also intersecting a lot of significant locations. And it intersects this line at that, like, very, very close to that epicenter that started Michael Wan's whole investigation. So, that's that's my jumping off point, right? I'm trying to connect the two, to draw correlations, synchronistic connections between what's going on here and what's going on here, right? And as we'll see, that this line continues on up, and it goes through some significant places in New York as well, and that's going to tie into a lot of things that I have lined up. And I wanted to put a lot more in this video, but I really feel like this is kind of like the introduction, the starting point to, I don't know how many videos this will be. I'm going to continue to follow this research where it leads me. It's been very, very interesting so far. And so I'm looking at my neck of the woods. And so here's a map of DC, and you can see right there, the 77th meridian runs right through this X, right? And this is where the Capitol building lies. And I live right over here across the river, right? Very, very close, maybe like 2 miles from here. So, looking all around these places and never really thinking about it when I was looking at these places, that, so many of the significant places that we've been visiting have been very, very close or right on this particular line here. And so, I have this personal connection to this place. I mean, when I was in the military, I was stationed in Norfolk, and I lived in Virginia Beach, which is, right down there by there's another star fort very close to the 77th meridian called Fort Monroe, which I'm going to get into in another video. But again, you have these star forts in this alignment. And what are these star forts? I mean, I don't know, but I definitely don't buy the mainstream narrative or story about these things. So I'm looking here right now, and one thing that's significant about, this whole thing is that within DC itself, the 77th meridian has several markers. So it seems to be important, to the people who put these things here. And this is by George Washington University, which will come up here in just a minute. But you have this concrete line to demark the American meridian, as they call it. But this is the 77th meridian. They call it the American meridian. And so, they have this little plaque here, and it's the American meridian. To your left is the hemisphere of the Atlantic, the hemisphere of Europe and Africa, of Roman numerals and Indian script, of the Silk Road and the rising sun. To your right is the hemisphere of the Pacific and the American West, the hemisphere of Japan and China, of calligraphy and rocketry, of towering volcanoes and the starry night. So, they're already with this language talking about Europe and the other side of this line being the rising sun, and the American side, or the westerly side of this line, this demarcating line, being like the starry night. I mean, you have images of rocketry and volcanoes. I find this very interesting, this language and how they're using to describe the two sides of this line. And, obviously this line has some significance to the people who put this here. Beneath your feet is the line that divides these two. From 1848 to 1884, the United States of America marked the center of its world at this line. Before it accepted the meridian at Greenwich, England, as the prime meridian, the United States separated the world into Eastern and Western hemispheres along the American meridian, a line that originated at the old U.S. Naval Observatory and passed through this point. This meridian was used to survey the Western states, and the straight borders of those states are measured in integral degrees from this point, right? And you can see like these state borders and their westerly degrees. But it's interesting, right? They mentioned that this line originated at the old US Naval Observatory, right? And so here again, they're tying that into this theme of the starry night, right? Observing the stars. That's what we do at, these observatories. And so you have this, like, almost in your mind, you've got day and night, right? The sun on the European side and the starry night, which would include the moon. So you've got your lunar and your solar sides of this line. So this is separating day and night, essentially. So I thought that was interesting. And then there is a park that I found that is in right there in DC. It's right on the, the 77th meridian, or very, very close to it. It's difficult to tell too. So there seems to be some debate on exactly where this 77th meridian passes through the city. They've moved some markers, but this one here is between 15th and 16th Street. And you got Florida, Euclid. So it's a long, long park, right? But this park it's pretty gorgeous. And a lot of this stuff, if you read the history of this park, was built, well into like the 1900s. But just the ornate nature of this flowing stair-step fountain and these arches and columns, it's a beautiful, beautiful park. And there happens to be a marker there. We'll see. So I go to Wikipedia and I'm looking at this park. So Meridian Hill Park is a structured urban park located in Washington, D.C., neighborhood of Columbia Heights. So here we have that connection to, Columbia again. It also abuts the nearby neighborhood of Adams Morgan. The park was designed and built between 1912 and 1940. This 12-acre formerly landscape site is officially part of the National Capital Parks unit of the park system and is administered by the superintendent nearby Rock Creek Park. And Rock Creek Park is where the current Naval Observatory lies. I'm not really certain where the old Naval Observatory was, but the new one isn't very far from the 77th meridian either. And it's bordered 15th, 16th streets. And so it sits on a prominent hill, 1.5 miles directly north of the White House. And it's also been referred to as Malcolm X Park. They actually tried to get it renamed that, and they failed. So they didn't allow this park to be called that officially. And so at the time of DC's creation in 1791, the land beneath present-day Meridian Hill was owned by Robert Peter, wealthy Georgetown merchant, and was known as Peter's Hill. In 1804, President Thomas Jefferson had a geodetic marker placed on this large hill, centered exactly north of the White House. This marker helped to establish a longitudinal meridian for the city and the nation, the White House Meridian. So here we have like another name for it, White House Meridian and American Meridian. After the War of 1812, Commodore David Porter, a naval hero of that war, acquired the hill in 1816 as part of a 110-acre tract of land that he had purchased. He named this property Meridian Hill. On the brow of this prominent hill, on his new estate and close to the marker, Porter then built a large and famous mansion, which he also named Meridian Hill. The home faced south with the dramatic view of the White House and the Potomac River. Meridian Hill Park today shares this view. So, I'm not going to go too far deep into the history of this park, but, obviously this location and this line, this Meridian line, is significant. And you can see that he built, this giant mansion. And then, of course, they said that they tore it down or it caught fire. It's always a fire or something. But, it makes me wonder, was this building already there in that location, already having been significant to the natives that were there as well? So just very interesting. This is now what you have. So this is called the stone marker, marking the Washington Meridian, was formerly located 52 feet 9 inches west of this tablet, which was presented by the Army and Navy chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. Another interesting group to look into as well, tied in with the Freemasonry here, especially. They seem to do a lot of events together, the Daughters of the American Revolution, with the Scottish Rite Freemasons. So this is the tablet that marks where the Meridian marker used to be. So I guess the original marker that was placed there by Thomas Jefferson is no longer there. And of course, they have the marker near the George Washington University that I showed you. Now, George Washington University actually used to be called Columbian University. So again, with the Columbia references. And so they also have a lot of other areas of this park with these statues. They have a James Buchanan statue. For some reason, I know that they have like the mainstream narrative of why Buchanan has a statue here, but I know that James Buchanan is connected with the 40th parallel and the stuff that Michael Wan was doing. And here you have another statue of Dante. And this is called Serenity, which is a strange statue. A lot of people think that this thing is kind of an eyesore. I mean, the face is like been bashed off. It's missing a hand. But, it's in remembrance of William Henry Shepsey, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. So I don't know the connection. I don't know anything about this guy or why they chose this particular statue as a memorial. But this is here, and then you have this sculpture of Joan of Arc, which is also interesting. And I believe I don't know for sure. I'm going to have to check into this. But if Joan of Arc has a connection to like the Huguenots, the French Huguenots, that would be interesting, because some of the other things I'm uncovering are leading me down like a French connection with the Huguenots. And so I'm looking at all this. I have, there's these two markers. Jefferson put a geodetic marker. There was a mansion built. This is clearly a significant line, this meridian. And so, I wanted to try to find a connection with, England and John Dee, since, the Smith map has that connection, and, the 40th parallel has that connection to the Rosicrucians, and at the Ephrata cloister, and in the enclave, the cave there, Kelpius's cave in Philadelphia. So, I go and I start looking, and I come across this calendar issue. And, I found some like old chat forums from like 2000. So it's like 21 years old, and, not a whole lot on there, but there are several articles that were talking about this calendar issue and how it tied into John Dee and the 77th meridian. And so it has to do around the time that John Dee was the advisor to Queen Elizabeth. There was the Gregorian proposal to change or alter the calendar in order to sync up the spring equinox on the same day. So this all revolved around pinpointing to a high degree of accuracy and consistency the spring equinox, and it would help with simplifying Easter and all of these other important dates on the calendar. And so part of that had to do with this Gregorian proposal that was going to not really change anything. In fact, it was going to be very complicated, and you'd have a range of days. So I found this. However, even with such a properly regulated calendar reform, the 24-hour calendar interval within which the equinox would always have occurred would in general begin and end at some time other than local midnight for most longitudes, and would thus straddle two consecutive calendar dates, i.e. either March 20th to March 21st or March 21st to March 22nd. This 24-hour interval would only fall between midnight and midnight with a narrow band of specific longitude. Along this strip of longitude, the equinox would always have occurred on March 21st. So, and what they're talking about with this specific line of longitude and this proposal was a very little known or secret, almost calendar adjustment that was made by a Syrian, and by the last name of Allah, right? Allah had this system of this 33 years using like the life of Christ, and it was a 33-year cycle. And John Dee had come up with an 11-day adjustment for the leap years and some other such thing. It really gets complicated, and it's very mathematically driven. So I didn't want to like go into detail on this, but I found this other, reference saying, assuming, however, the ultimately correct 11-day calendar change, and this is John Dee's proposal to Queen Elizabeth on how they could, this whole 33-day calendar thing would put the equinox on March 21st every year for who knows how long. I think Dee talked about like over 300 years, and it would simplify the calendar and it would help align a very important day. So this all had to do with that. But the longitude at which this would occur on midnight to midnight is, as he's going to say here, the 77th West Meridian. So he says, however, the ultimately correct 11-day calendar change under Allah's system, the equinox would always fall between midnight and midnight, but only within a narrow band of specific longitude. Along this strip of longitude, the equinox would always have occurred on March 21st. Therefore, this specific band of longitude would be the only one on Earth within which the Nicene Edict could stay for literally thousands of years, astronomically correct. This would probably have come to be seen as God's chosen meridian by all churches that recognize the Nicene Council. And so now we have this sort of connection with the 77th meridian and John Dee. And so the rest of this article, I'm going to read that I took this from. So that's going to be the rest of this video. And it's a very interesting article. And I'm going to skip over all of the calendar stuff because that's not as important, as the connection that I'm trying to establish here of why this was important to John Dee. Obviously, on the surface of it, the story that we're given is that Dee was a Protestant, or he was supporting Queen Elizabeth, who was representing the Protestant authority in England. And of course, the Protestants wanted to have dominance over the Catholic Church. And so when it comes to this meridian line and targeting this equinox, it's apparently is extremely important to both the Protestant and Catholic churches at this time. And so Dee working out mathematically all of this stuff and figuring out that the 77th meridian is that perfect line, it makes sense that they would have designated that as their prime meridian for those years in the United States, and why that line has several markers and why DC is where it is. I don't know about its location on its parallel line, but obviously that area has massive significance, not just to Dee, but to the indigenous people that were here before the Europeans' arrival. So getting into this article, I'm just going to read. It's going to give a little bit of background on John Dee. A lot of this I'm familiar with. I dived into him a long time ago, and Michael Wan has gone over stuff about him. So I'm not going to dive too deep into him personally, but I think that this post on this forum has a lot of really good information, and there's a lot of interesting things that I didn't know about John Dee as well, and some more connections. So the author kind of implies, I guess, that his motivations are based off of like a Christian worldview, even though he freely acknowledges that Dee was a magician and he did all of these things. It just seems like his interpretation of what was going on is, I don't know. It's like he's not seeing what I'm seeing. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and just read this article, and let me pull it up here. And so he's going through the calendar thing, and he's talking about, what are the motives for the Spanish, right, who were controlled by the Catholic Church, and the English, which was under the banner of the Protestant Church. And the Spanish had already settled and occupied a lot of South America along this meridian line. And that made apparently the English and John Dee and Queen Elizabeth think that they were aware of the significance of that line, and then knew about the 33-year cycle adjustment to the calendar. And so that's kind of the background to what's really going on here. And he says, to understand the motives of both sides, it is educational to examine the key figure in the English decision to seek the holy longitude in the New World, Dr. John Dee. Dee was a scientist, mathematician, and one of the most brilliant men of his age. Among his many accomplishments, Dee could list a series of writings on mathematics which rivaled those of contemporaries like Copernicus. His mathematical preface to Euclid's Geometry was written in English rather than the traditional academic language of Latin, so that it might be understood by the common people. Considered by historians to be equal in stature with Francis Bacon's 17th century advancement in learning, Dee's mathematical preface was the first treatise in history that was specifically directed to all individuals who qualified as unfeigned lovers of truth, in order to open and expand the world of science for all people. He was also in many ways the father of the British Empire, as he was the one who established the legal claims of colonial territories worldwide for Queen Elizabeth. He also applied Euclidean geometry to naval navigation, writing several books on the subject and drawing up charts for navigational use, as well as designing instruments for the ships at sea to apply the principles he had developed. He eventually amassed a vast library of over 4,000 books on subjects ranging from ancient religions to the modern sciences. And so right here, you can see that if Dee and did indeed had like a hand in that John Smith map. I mean, first of all, let's just assume that John Smith was a real guy and he made that map and he really sailed and did all of those things. He would know that the longitude lines right there in that area of the map were not 307 to 311. He would have known this because the Spanish knew this and John Dee knew this. So it doesn't make sense that the map would, and so I looked into this, like why, I wanted to know why Smith used those longitudes that don't even exist on our map today. And so if you dig into it, the only thing I could find that even mentions it offhandedly was that Smith was basing his prime meridian off of the Canary Islands. So, you know, he was calculating out lines of longitude from the Canary Islands, but none of that makes any sense to me. You know, maybe indeed, I'm not really certain when the prime meridian was moved to Greenwich. Somebody told me it was 1666. So maybe this line was somewhere in the Canary Islands, but still to think that the 77th meridian west is significant for this whole calendar and pinning the date exactly of the equinox, you would want to be pretty precise about, you know, obviously they had an interest not just in knowing that, but wanting to colonize around this line. So it's one thing to know, okay, at the 77th meridian, that's where the equinox is really exact and observable. But, you know, are you going to move everyone over there to this imaginary line just to observe an equinox? So clearly there was a lot more going on esoterically with the 77th meridian, and it's coming out very obviously in this story. I mean, look at all the things that John Dee is into. I mean, he's going into Enoki, like summoning angels and getting all of this information from angels, and him and Kelly were doing all of these things. I don't think that a mystical guy like John Dee is simply going to be interested in a meridian line because he can better better peg the spring equinox. And, you know, so like the whole story doesn't, it makes some sense, but it doesn't really add up overall when you think about the cost and the time and the energy for both Spain and Britain to move to this area and colonize it. right? I mean, at what cost of life, the expense, the money, the time, all of it, just so that you can better calculate the spring equinox and make calculating Easter easier. I'm not buying that that was the true underlying motivation for seeking out this mystical line, right? Calling it God's meridian or the holy meridian. So, yeah, I think there is a lot more to this line in this story. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that Dee obviously had a very, very vast knowledge of navigation, mapping, cartography, geology. I mean, so to put those longitudes on the map doesn't make any sense. So they have to have a significance. I just really fully need to like dig more into those numbers and find out what's really being shown to us in that map, right? And I'm looking at the built out city in Jamestown, and it's telling me that either Smith showed up there and he saw what he drew, but if that was all over the place, like in DC area on the map, you don't see anything like that. You just see like a couple little circles with a dot in them. That's the only place at Jamestown that built out cityscape is drawn in on the map. So I feel like that's significant in and of itself. And the fact that Jamestown is on the 77th meridian, and like, did Dee know that there were people that were already living there? And, had they already received word? Because, as we'll find out, he was also doing a lot of spying and traveling for the crown. Of course, like the Caesar before him, he was also a mystic, a deist, a man of God who subscribed to no particular religion, and the royal astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee had ingratiated himself to Elizabeth during the reign of her Catholic sister, Queen Mary, by providing her with horoscopes for both Elizabeth and her sister. Mary had him in prison for sorcery, but upon her death, Elizabeth brought him in as an advisor to her privy council. Dee used his talents as an astrologer to select the date of the Queen's coronation, and he was also a close friend of Francis Walsingham, head of Elizabeth's secret police. Walsingham used Dee frequently on overseas missions when he acted as an agent for England. In this capacity, he always signed his correspondence with the Queen with the mark 007. And in the way he does it, you could also say it looks like a little bit like the two-ball cane symbol that the Masons use, and was used loosely as the model for Ian Fleming's super spy James Bond, right? So, I mean, Dee was traveling on these missions for the, for the Queen's secret police, this intelligence agency, and Dee was a spy. Like, what are the chances that he didn't go to the New World and check it out and do some poking around? I mean, I think the chances are very good that, at this time when the focus was shifting to this land, that absolutely they would want intelligence about this place. Even before this whole meridian discovery, it had obvious significance for, economic reasons and population reasons, supply chain and all that. So, and power and dominance and blah, blah, blah. So Dee was also well acquainted with William Shakespeare, who apparently based his characters King Lear and Prospero of The Tempest on Dee's highly complex life. And, people have also said that, William Shakespeare was Francis Bacon. So it's very likely that, Bacon was Shakespeare. That last portrayal of a man influenced and ultimately controlled by his fascination with magic is perhaps most crucial. For while Dee was a God-fearing man, right? Was he though? I don't know. And one of the most accomplished scientists of his day, it was his forays into magical pursuits which ultimately defined him. In fact, one of Dee's biographers described him as Elizabethan England's great magus. That particular depiction is important because of the crucial role of the Magi, from which the term magus comes, in the historical events we have already described, namely the birth and death and birth again of Christ, around which our Western calendar for the last 2,000 years supposedly revolved. According to Adrian Gilbert, author of Signs in the Sky, the Magi were a secret priesthood educated in the Egyptian Orion mysteries, who managed to find their way to the birthplace of Christ. They are the three kings of Orient, or Orion, spoken of in the Gospel of Matthew. And Gilbert argues that they specifically saw Jesus as a Horus King type figure. That Dee may have been linked with such a group is not particularly far-fetched, as he had some noble blood in his family line, and Magi were a bloodline priesthood. If indeed the Magi were kings from Orion, and Dee considered himself one of them, then his loyalties would necessarily be to that much older order rather than the more modern Christian churches. And I agree. Yeah, like I think Dee, I don't think he was pretending to be a Christian. I think he was playing the part of an ignorant Christian with a lot of vast knowledge about esoteric things that other people probably just couldn't even understand and would just call it witchcraft. But, you know, he played it down and he played his part in order to sort of fit into the role that he found himself in. This conclusion becomes even more obvious when we look at the actual magic rituals in which Dee thoroughly engaged. Dee was a practitioner of Hermetic Gnosticism, a school of thought based on the ancient pre-Christian teachings of the Greek god Hermes. Hermes was in fact a mere copy of the much earlier Egyptian god of knowledge and language, Thoth. In this sense, all Hermetic Gnosticism can be viewed as a worship of the teachings of Thoth. According to the Egyptian mythos, Thoth was one of the gods who came down to earth along with Isis and Osiris to bring the fruits of knowledge, civilization, and the sciences to the Egyptian people. This triumvirate of gods is the key to what became the vast Egyptian civilization, and Thoth is in fact thought to be the god who commissioned the Great Pyramids of Giza. Dee was a learned man, and in his spiritual journeys, he had discovered quite a bit about the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. In 1581, using his knowledge of these ancient practices, he begins a series of attempts to communicate with higher beings. His channel in this capacity was one Sir Edward Kelly, something of a self-educated rogue, but a man well known to the English courts. The focus of their efforts was to obtain the knowledge of the Book of Enoch, a supposed lost book of the Bible that contained the truth about man's existence, the afterlife, and his future on earth. Enoch was a fairly obscure figure in the now traditional Bible, being seventh tetrahedral spin symmetries, anyone? In line from Adam. Enoch, however, was unique in one respect. He was considered immortal because God had taken him to heaven without benefit of death after 365 years on earth, an obviously important symbolic connection of Enoch with the calendar year. Masonic legend, or as Knight and Lomas have shown, Enoch is also a central figure around which a great deal of Masonic legend is centered, as he is said to have constructed the two pillars of Masonic lore to preserve the antediluvian high knowledge of Atlantis inside them. Dee and Kelly were evidently successful in their attempts, as they eventually contacted an angel named Uriel. Uriel first provided them with complex alphabet of angelic language and then proceeded to dictate the entire Book of Enoch to Kelly in this language. Dee, in turn, dutifully recorded all that was passed to the both of them by Uriel, and the various spells and incantations used and dictated in this process became a school of magic known as Enochian magic. Strangely, portions of the apocryphal Book of Enoch were brought to Europe from Ethiopia in the 1700s and were also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. Dee's version appears to be pretty much the same as those far later discoveries, and advocates of the Hermetic tradition have pointed to this as proof of Dee's success in contacting a higher spiritual being. However, given Dee's vast library of rare books, and as we have and will show, his affinity for the knowledge of ancient Egypt, it is also plausible that he got his information from one of those secret textual sources. All of this would seem on the surface to be wholly irrelevant to the question at hand, much less to the issues of faces on Mars or ongoing ritual NASA cover-ups. However, this is not the case. D had an immense effect on later occultists, most notably Aleister Crowley. You may be surprised to find that both Crowley and D in turn had very influential effects on the founders of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. That story, as extraordinary as it is and as important as it is, will ultimately come to understanding some currently inexplicable ritual space events. So, he's getting, like, we've already covered a lot of this stuff. So the relevance to the entire issue of deliberate calendar manipulation is best understood when we look at Dee's involvement in the English response to the Gregorian reform. After receiving a copy of the papal bull in diplomatic correspondence, Walsingham assigned Dee the task of evaluating England's course of action in the matter. Dee threw himself into the work, even setting aside his channeling with Kelly to fully devote himself to the task at hand. Dee worked under the utmost secrecy, an action which is interpreted by Cassidy as a need to keep the Spanish, and hence the Catholics, from learning that England was investigating the calendrical longitude. Dee eventually finished his work, a plain discourse and humble advisor for our glorious Queen Elizabeth, her most excellent majesty, to pursue and consider as concerning the needful reformation of the vulgar calendar for the civil years and the days accompanying or verifying according to the time truly spent. That's quite a title. On February 26th, 1582, and delivered it to Lord Treasurer Burleigh to present to the Queen. In it, Dee called for an 11-day correction, as opposed to the Gregorian 10-day correction for 1582. But a note attached to the work allowed for a 10-day correction to 1583. In a complicated exercise explained by Cassidy, he asserts that Dee was actually trying to implement the 33-year Anni Domini Allah's calendar by only seeming to accept the papal decree. But Dee's 10-day correction would only work if 1584 was declared subsequently not to be a leap year. This, however, was not done, and England stayed on its own calendar until 1752, when they finally acceded to the Gregorian reform that most of the rest of the world had long been using, but with an 11-day correction instead of the Gregorian 10. In doing so, they actually set by their own clock the date of the vernal equinox on March 21st, but only on God's longitude. The issue of whether Dee was, by his footnote, actually agreeing with the Gregorian correction is a controversial one among most scholars. The traditional view is that his note was meant to give the Queen an out in order to facilitate continued diplomatic communication and commerce with the Catholic world. Not only is this highly unlikely, given his and the Queen's documented distaste for papal authority, but Cassidy points to a verse in Dee's own paper which clearly indicates that he was actually a clandestine advocate of the, remember, highly secret to both sides, 33-year Anni Domini calendar. And so I guess this is a poem that he wrote to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, our Empress bright, who in the year of 83 thus made the truth to come to light, and civil year with heaven agree. But 84 the pattern is of Christ's birth year, and so for I besext shall fall little May's, to shew the sun of Christ's birthday. 300 years shall not remove the sun one day from this new match. Nature no more shall us reprove her golden time, so yield to watch. Cassidy notes the following. The third verse is usually held to predict that the accuracy of the new calendar will match the sun's behavior every Christmas day to an accuracy of 1 day in 300 years. This is not much of a claim to accuracy since it implies a possible error of up to 0.0033 days between the real solar year, based on Christmas or New Year, and the proposed Elizabethan reform average year. If Dee really meant to follow the Gregorian year length and leap year rule, then he would have known that the accuracy for any point in the tropical zone was much better than this apparent 0.0033 days year claim. So this is like really involved. And I don't know if I'm, like going to go through and read all of this, but there's some interesting stuff that this guy pulls out of here. And it's got me thinking about, the longitude lines on the map and how they're marked. And if those numbers, this 307 through 311, or the missing 311, is, maybe a cipher or a key, or an encoding of this idea, right? This correction, and to point towards the 77th meridian line. So I don't know. It's just definitely something to consider. What is happening here is that D is embedding a code, right? So here, like, this is his MO. He loves to do this stuff. A deliberate and obvious error in his calculations, which just happens to come out to a decimal harmonic of 33. He was trying to signal to anyone in the game the significance of the cycle of 33. And, like, very well could be. That is a very plausible take on that. Why would he make a mistake like that he's not typically known to make, that very obvious one? So is that the real significance of 33, like this calendar adjustment? I mean, who really knows? But it just points out the habit of D trying to encode things within his work. And they go on to talk about this whole thing in the vernal equinox at the 77th meridian. And they were sort of trying to trick the Spanish into believing that they accepted the Gregorian calendar cycle, but they were adding in this 11-day change and going off this 33-year-old Anno Domini calendar. So anyway, one needs only to look at the subsequent actions of D and his associates to quickly determine that D had full knowledge of the AD calendar and its implicit sacred longitude. D was heavily involved in a secret society known as the School of Night. So this is a new one for me. I had never heard of this School of Night, and definitely something to look more into. About which virtually nothing is known. Well, it's probably going to be very difficult to find anything out about it. Its members certainly did include D. Raleigh, Sir Francis Bacon, and a rather mysterious figure, Lord Fernando Strange, Earl of Derby. Reminds me of like the Doctor Strange character in the Marvel comics. They met usually at Strange's estate and were viewed with suspicion by the religious leaders of the day because of their access to Queen Elizabeth. It doesn't take too much to figure out what went on at these meetings, or what the subject of the discussions must have turned to often. Bacon even wrote a novel, published only posthumously in 1626, titled provocatively The New Atlantis. It reads like a virtual roadmap of what these collective mystics had discerned from their studies of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. The thrust of the story is of a shipwrecked crew landing on a mysterious shore in the New World, where they are greeted and ministered to by a kind, wise old man and his servants. He is simply the ambassador to what is revealed to be a substantial and subsequently secret society in the New World. During the course of their stay, many secrets are revealed to them. These are barely veiled references to the Society of Solomon's House, an obvious allusion to the Masons, who in their own lore are the ancient designers of Solomon's temple, and a flat Egyptian-type Horus statement that this society is, quote, the very eye of this kingdom. The book also contains references to the coming apocalypse and states matter-of-factly that America is the land of Atlantis. It goes on to tell the tale of a vast and technologically advanced civilization overtaken by a catastrophic ancient inundation. And so, we get into like the reset stuff and what are these, rock formations and buildings that remain here that are questionable on their history. The other thing that is interesting too is about the New Atlantis. I read this some years ago. They talked about a device that these the people that were sort of in charge of this place, running it behind the scenes. Deep within the earth, they had a device that could harness the power of the sun. And so we're talking about, like nuclear or, some other form of higher technology, right? Splitting the atom, right? Creating this, like probably a particle accelerator is really what they were describing. And so, you see, like in the new Atlantis, this is the big secret that they're protecting is this particle accelerator of sorts. And, who knows whether they were using it for travel or timeline manipulation or what. That this is simply a thinly veiled master plan for what was to become the United States of America could not be more clear. Bacon saw an egalitarian utopia springing forth in the New World based on hermetic natural laws and overseen by a quiet, benevolent, secret society. So this is where, the Rosicrucians really come in. That Dee, Bacon, Raleigh, and their contemporaries sought to achieve this utopian state in the North American British colonies themselves is confirmed by their later actions, in which they actually sowed the seeds of the very secret society that they hoped would guide the people of the new Atlantis. But in order to accomplish this, they must first obtain a foothold there. So, this is also going to tie in, the Rosicrucian stuff and the effort of cloister and all of this stuff that Michael Wan and Ross Ben have done. This is really at the heart of what's going on. Planting this seed, these people to guide. And so the things that I'm looking into here in DC have kind of also connected with that. And so that's going to be probably in the next video that I do as well. And that's going to tie into some of the work that they just recently did on the Chautauquas. So when Dee decoded the Anno Domini calendar, it must have confirmed to the School of Night that which they already suspected, that America was the special place that the antiquarian legends spoke of. What is certain is that immediately after Dee's calendar work was published, he and Raleigh began to do what was necessary for England, and by extension their secret society, to establish a beachhead in America. By April 1585, after nearly 3 years of preparation, the first serious English expedition to colonize America was launched under the guidance of John White and Thomas Harriot. Harriot, a student of Dee's and close friend of Raleigh, was already well aware of the significance of the 77th meridian and the 33-year calendar cycle. Cassidy has discovered in Harriot's notes a number of references to the AD calendar system. Lest you have any doubts that the location of the new 33-year cycle prime meridian was of the utmost concern to these first English settlers, you need only look at where they landed to allay your doubts. From their landing spot at Roanoke Island, Virginia, Harriot and White were in a perfect position to survey the land and the stars. So, here again, it's all about the stars, right? Like we saw with the dividing line, the meridian, on the west side of that line is the stars, the moon, and on the other side is the solar, the sun. And so there seems to be this repeated connection that keeps coming up with, stars and mapping the stars and this meridian line. And, obviously the calculating the accurately and precisely the equinox is important in doing that. So, clearly this has a lot more importance than what seems on the surface to be conveyed here, right? But we know that it's there. It's just showing us, right? It's just popping up everywhere with this connection with the stars and night. Let's see. Where was I? They landed stars. Remember, they didn't know it was exactly 77 degrees west when they got there, only that they were close. And according to Cassidy, the proper longitude was marked out on the map that White brought back. So again, this is prior to Smith, prior to his map. And they already had a map themselves where they marked 77 degrees west meridian, right? So again, with the Smith map and the weird longitude lines, like there's definitely something going on with that. But things do not go smoothly. The first colony failed, as did a second in 1587. By 1588, England had other worries, and the Spanish Armada set sail to invade her. Dee is famously credited with casting a hex on the Armada and conjuring the bad weather, which contributed more to the Armada's defeat than anything the English Navy did, which was the extent of his reputation at the time. As England lost interest temporarily in the new Atlantis, Dee and the School of Knights set about creating a new movement which they intended to be the guiding star of their new world. The Rosicrucians, or Order of the Rose Cross, are a quasi-Masonic group and had their roots in these early discussions, at least one of which was in Lüneburg, Germany in 1586, when Dee was abroad. The order openly grounds itself in the ancient Egyptian mysteries of Isis and Osiris, Sirius and Orion, and it exerted a great influence throughout Europe's ruling elite from the early 1600s on. So I think what we're looking at here with these Rosicrucians is, this is a group of people, John Dee, right? They are interested in stellar and lunar magic, right? So the moon and the stars are extremely important within, their magical system. But all their plans in the end were foiled. Elizabeth died in 1603 and was replaced on the throne by King James I of Scotland. James was the first overtly Scottish Rite Masonic royal, and he quickly imprisoned Dee, Raleigh, and Bacon. The Masons obviously saw Dee and the School of Knight as rivals to the quest to dominate the new Atlantis, and they were out of favor. Yet James and the Masons themselves must have equally understood the unique significance of the 33-year calendar cycle, because they promptly launched the Jamestown colony, located dead on the 77th west longitude. Curiously, Dee and Kelly had both left the British Isles shortly after this presentation of his calendar treatise to Elizabeth to travel in Eastern Europe. There they circulated among the royal houses and curried favor with various emperors and kings. Kelly was quite successful in these ventures, Dee less so. Dee had left England in late 1583 to travel through Poland and Bohemia, territory which would ultimately become Germany, at the invitation of Polish Count Lasky. Lasky had rather mysteriously just shown up in England, inquiring about Dee and Kelly's channeling and other occult activities. Kelly laid claim to success with alchemy. He was actually knighted by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph, ostensibly for his alchemical contributions to the court. What they seemed to be doing was spreading the knowledge of something among these high houses. We have found that they were very successful in doing so. And so, part of this campaign too, I think will come back later when I start getting into the connection with, this area and this Rosicrucian order and another order that's not very secret, but probably does have many secrets that seems to be connected. And I've never really heard anyone make this connection before, but I'm sure if it's a thought in my head, somebody has thought of it and probably posted it somewhere on the internet, but I did not see it. So anyway, so it goes on and on and on, talking about, Dee and what he was doing around this time. A lot of the other interesting stuff, like you have this young law student named Johann Bayer, right? And I don't know if he has any connection to, the Bayer company or the family that is behind that. He made a contribution to astronomy that almost certainly sprang from his secret knowledge that Dee had apparently been spreading on the continent. Bayer was a Bavarian amateur astronomer who first named stars by assigning them to constellations and giving them Greek letters, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, etc., in order of decreasing brightness. His seminal work, the Uranometria,
published in 1603, not only set this new standard for stellar designation, but also created several entirely new constellations, one of which will ultimately have a major role in unraveling the mystery we have before us. What Bayer did was to literally carve out a new constellation from the stars of Canis Major. Canis Major, of course, contains the key celestial player in the Millennium Madness we are documenting, Sirius. Of course, this guy is talking about whatever was going on in the year 2000. I don't know if this was just after Y2K. So, like, he's obviously doing all this synchromistic stuff back then in 2000 and applying it to what was going on at his time. Bayer's new constellation is also located precisely on the meridian with Orion, a relationship which we took to be a marker of some kind for future events. He named this new constellation Columba, apparently after the dove that is sent out of Noah's Ark to search for dry land after the deluge. What we next needed to do was figure out the history and mythology of this new constellation and any connection to the new Atlantis Dee and Bacon had been seeking. According to Allen, star names, their lore and meaning, Columba was made up from the southwestern outliers of Canis Major, near to the ship Argo, Noah's Ark, and so it was regarded as the attendant dove. And from Genesis, and then he just talks about the line out of Genesis. And so here's like the takeaway that I got with this was that, he's sending out this raven. And if it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth, then he sent out the dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took it and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days. So like you have these two periods of 7 days. And so you have it yet again, this 77 reference and this constellation that was created by this follower of Dee. So, that's the end of the article. And for this first sort of foray into this 77th Meridian thing, I think I'm going to end it here for right now, but I definitely have more stuff that I wanted to put into this presentation. It's just, this is getting long, and, I want to kind of parse it out because there are certain things that connect with other things, and then there are things that are off by themselves. And, I'm still trying to figure out how to organize them in a way that really like highlights this synchromistic connection that's going on that I'm discovering. At the same time, I'm just really having fun doing this, and it's absorbing a lot of my time, and energy seems to be really focused on this avenue of research. So, I'll probably be doing a lot more of these, and, I'm going to continue to do the videos that, I have been doing, just looking at different things. And of course, Thursday nights, everybody's welcome to come and join us on Thursday nights. The link is on the YouTube channel, like header image, and also in the about section of the YouTube page. So, if you want to come in on Thursday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and, talk about esoteric stuff, then just go to that link. Anyway, until next time, take care.